Hello, this is the third lesson of the Intermediate Java course. Today we're going to talk about classes and objects. I'm going to start with a definition of classes and objects, and then what they are, methods, how the relationship between classes and objects works, and then we're going to take a look at some boilerplate code, and that will be it. Alright, what are classes and objects? First question. A good way to understand the concept of classes and objects is through analogies. Um, One good analogy is the cookie cutter and cookie relationship. So you can think of the class as a cookie cutter and the object as a cookie. So the class can make multiple objects out of the cookie dough, right? And each object is the cookie, right? So you can make multiple cookies out of one cookie cutter. There's also another analogy which might be better for you. I don't know. Either one works. The blueprint and structure relationship. So if I have a blueprint for like a house, let's say, that blueprint basically tells you what you need on your house, right? I want the walls to be here and here, for example, and I want a roof to look like, some kind of triangle thing. And then when someone goes and actually builds that, it's not when they build that, they're going to make it. However, it's not like set in stone what exactly they're going to make when I have my blueprint. And then if someone else makes another house off of my blueprint, theirs might be a little bit different. And those two houses obviously aren't the same house, right? They're in two different places in space. They look slightly different. One might be a different color or different size or something. But they're both houses, right? They both got made from my house blueprint, so therefore they're both houses. Right, I already talked about some of these examples, but here's another one. A car is an object. So a car can be created through a set of instructions, right? You make it in a factory. Most cars are made in factories, though. And one factory can make lots of cars. The car will have different properties, like, for example, speed, gas mileage, the make and the model. And those vary from car to car, right? Not every car has the same gas mileage and speed. Or make and model are like the name and type of the car. If you don't know what a make or model is, like a model would be like an iPhone S, and a make would be like whether it's Apple or Android kind of thing. That's what those mean. And that's basically how it works. You can have lots of cars. They're all cars. They all got made from the factory, which is the class. But they're all different. They have different properties, but they are still all cars. Right, we already talked about this, the blueprint versus the actual thing. So the blueprint is the class and the object is the actual thing. So with one blueprint, you can make multiple things. Those things are called objects, and the blueprint is called a class. You can also call objects instances of the class. That's the more formal name for them. Now I'm going to start talking about classes in the more like, what does it mean when we're coding kind of thing. Classes have two main components. They have attributes, also known as instance variables, and they have methods. An example of an instance variable or attribute would be a string variable in a car class called model, right? It would just store a string which would have the model in it. And whenever an object of that car class is made, it's going to have its own value in that model variable. And if you make a second car object from that car class, the model of that new car might be different, right? They're just unique values. They don't necessarily have to be the same They're not related in any way. They're just both model variables of the two cars. Classes also have methods. One example of a method is something. Methods are basically the things that aren't like inherently stored in the class. Like a model obviously would be a variable because you don't do anything with the model. It's just data. But a method would be like a drive method, right? The car has the ability to drive. So that would be a method, not a variable. Now objects are also known as an instance of class. That's the more formal definition, more formal name. So let's say I have a car. That car is an instance of the car class, right? It has its own make, its own model, its own speed, its own gas mileage, its own drive method, everything. Well, actually, the drive method is the same as the other cars' drive methods, but the variables are all different. And all the other cars have those things as well, but all the other cars don't necessarily have the same values in those things, right? My speed might be different from their speed, and their model might be different from my model, for example. So if we look at objects and classes, you'll notice that a class is not very useful by itself. Like if I have a blueprint for a house, that's not really going to do much. But once you have an object of that blueprint, then you're actually able to do something. So once you have a class, you can create objects, and those objects are usually what you use to do things. Not always, but that's usually how it works. Alright, now that we've talked about the theory behind classes and objects, or the understanding, the foundational understanding of it, I'm going to show you this boilerplate code. So, you'll notice the main method here. You're very familiar with this probably by now. This is where you just put all your regular code, like, you know, your print statements or whatever, or your anything that you would normally put in, you would put here. The new thing that you actually have to pay attention to is this public class car. Now you've put this here every time before that, right? You'd have public class, you know, hello world, and then you'd have in here you just print hello world, right? You would have this, but now you are actually going to care about the space between public class and public static void main. Usually you don't care about this space when you're anywhere just in the intro class, but now we can actually put things here. We can put a variable right here, or we can put a method right here. And that is basically what a class looks like if you're actually looking at the code. So there would be like string model right here, or int speed, or string make, or whatever would be in there would be in there. Alright. There are just 2 exercises for this lesson, and they're really like lots of exercises. Depends how much you want to do it. But the tasks are to just think of some more examples that represent classes and objects. We talked about cookie cutters, blueprints, and cars so far. Try to come up with some more so that you develop your own understanding. Then come up with another analogy. Wait, those are kind of the same thing, but when I say another analogy, I mean try to come up with an example. Like, try to come up with, for example, if you wanted to have a player class for some game you're making, right? What would you want to put there as instance variables or methods? Like, for example, you would want them to have, you know, maybe health, or an inventory, or you can think of a lot of things, but think of what would be the instance variables of that player class. And that is all.